Hello, everyone. Here we are again. The energy of the universe unfolding in us and through us and as us. I'm Dr. Marj Britt, founder of Called by Love and Living Loving Legacy and all of the things that have come out of that. And I am so curious to see what the universe is about to come in its next dimension, in its next iteration, in the next repeating pattern that is about to unfold. What I'm aware of is that we are in a very, very unusual time in the history of this planet. It is a time where dimensions are shifting, and we are in an energy field of undoing as well as emergence. And so it's fabulous to be part of that. It's almost as if some of us could say we were born for this time. And so it's so good to have you here today. And our theme today is magic. That came to me very much out of the energy of the collaboration of the people who were on the call last month. We were talking about the spiral, and it was bringing back repeating patterns in my own life. The spiral was very much a part of my entry into the realms of all of the things that ultimately became part of the campus of consciousness at Unity in Tustin. And Don Beck was part of that. And so those who were on the call last week showed up, some new people, because their interest was really more about the spiral and about what that meant in their lives. And now we're here with the energy of magic. How did that happen? In the call last month, there was an interesting comment in the dialogue afterwards. It was probably in the last 20 or 30 minutes of the call. And Gary came online. He was there invited by E.J. Niles, who was in dialogue with me. And Gary came on the call, and he actually lives in Kansas City and knew EJ from when she was there as part of the ministerial school faculty at Unity Worldwide Ministries. And Gary said, you know, I'd be real hesitant to use the word advanced. That was fascinating to me because I've used the word advanced a lot. But I wanted to listen to what he had to say. And what he said was so significant. He was talking about his work with understanding the writings of Black Elk and the book Black Elk Speaks. And he made a significant statement, one statement that actually was the spark for this entire call. He said, we have lost something really important in moving into stages beyond that. That fascinated me. What had we lost? What did he see that I didn't see? I knew about Black Elk Speak. I'd never taken any deep dives into what the teachings were about. And yet I had an awareness, sort of an overview kind of awareness of what they were. And yet I found myself just really bringing together different pieces. Don Beck called this color purple. And purple is a magical color for me. It's actually one of my favorite colors. Blue and purple are the two colors that I relate to most profoundly. And what did this magic that Don Beck talked about, which is a very early stage? It's like when you're a child, when you believe in Santa Claus, when you talk about things like the tooth fairy, and it's very real to you. What did you know then? What were you tapping into then that you may have lost that's part of the magic? How is it showing up in ways that just continue to reveal themselves? And maybe you're seeing them and maybe you're not. Maybe you've gotten stuck in some of the realms of the mind or the intellect. And maybe you're not experiencing the realms of the magic in conscious ways any longer. And so all of a sudden, questions were coming to me, and a yearning. And when I feel yearning, it's very, very different. It's not a desire that will lead to a goal that comes out of my human mind. It's coming directly from my heart. It's coming from a place in me that is part of a vibrational field that's embodied, but it's not coming from the human mind. And so these were all kind of interesting awarenesses, small a awarenesses, or was it part of a capital A awareness that I hadn't totally accessed yet? And so I began just staying in the unknowing and allowing the unknowing to speak. The way that you access that is not through the outer world. It is through allowing the stillness to interrelate your inner world and the outer world without your human intellect, your human mind, messing it up or muddying the water, throwing you into the polarities of right and wrong and good and bad and all of those kinds of things that we learn to use in a very important way, needed way, as we're evolving in human levels of consciousness. And then I became aware of different kinds of things that were actually coming in from the outer world, little clips of things that I would notice in emails, even today. One of the phrases that I absolutely, and I can't even remember who it came from. I think it may have been Carolyn Mays. The phrase grace descending and gratitude ascending. And I thought, oh my God, that's the involution and evolution. That is the creation story of the whole Bible. The first chapter of Genesis, involution, the rest of the Bible, evolution. It's all of it. Grace descending, gratitude ascending. And so today, I want to enter a different territory than we usually do. Rather than me spending a lot of time teaching, I'm going to follow one of the things that came to me in an experience of the silence. We may actually replicate that as we share our time together, because the way that it came to me was in sort of a hybrid setting, I'll call it. I have been drawn to take some online courses that relate to writing. I've been doing some with Diana Wentworth, and that's been quite delightful and loved that. I've also been doing some with a teacher called Melanie Steele that did a 2-week retreat for the writer's soul. It's only required from me 5 minutes a day, unless I wanted to put more into it. And beyond that, it was entirely up to me. But different moments of when I would write. So in one of the moments of writing with Diana Wentworth, she gave a writing prompt. And the writing prompt was very, very simple. It was a time when. And so in your reminder email, there was a link to a document, a PDF, that I invited you to read if you wanted to, and said I might refer to it in our time together today. What I didn't say was that we might do a similar kind of prompt today and do some writing, but I want part of this to all emerge naturally from you, through you, and as you. I don't want it to come from our human minds. What I'm really interested in is letting our souls begin to speak, letting voices within us begin to reveal themselves in ways that we may not always pay attention to, because we focus in to our human mind, or we focus into the task at hand. And all of those things are really good and really necessary and have been really important for us as we have entered the realms of setting goals and multitasking and all of those things. They're not bad things. They're useful. And yet, what's beyond them? What does our soul want us to know? What is our soul guiding us to? How is the soul different than the human mind? Well, the soul is eternal. Your soul was there before the beginning. Before Abraham, I was. Your soul comes out of the source energy, the oneness. It's lived hundreds, probably thousands of lifetimes. Michaelia probably knows about this more than I do, because she's taken some really deep dives in it. So maybe at some point, Michaelia, you may want to let your soul speak. And all of the ways that your soul brings together the pieces of your life that relate to your commitment, your soul's commitment in this lifetime. Fabienne is Fabienne, Melanie is Melanie, Ed is Ed, David is David, Michaelia is Michaelia, Anna is Anna, Joanne as Joanne, Patty is Patty, Carrie is Carrie, Donald is Donald, Jan is Jan, Marla is Marla. That looks like we have names that are individualized expressions of your soul that's lived 1,000+ lifetimes. And yet, this is just one reality of multiple realities existing simultaneously, both in your individualized soul and in our collective oneness. So today we have a group soul as well as an individualized soul. Now, some of you may go into this space. This is not uncommon with people who hear my teaching, whether it was at Unity in Tustin or online. What the hell is she talking about? I don't understand a thing she's saying. And I can't tell you the number of people who have said that to me over the years. It's many. And so if that's you today, know that you're not alone. And there have been a lot of people that felt that way. And then suddenly, what some people who have told me that tell me happens is everything falls into place. It's like, oh my God, that's what it was. That's what it is. It's about me as well as the universe. And so, one of the things that I want to do today, as we're talking about all of these dynamics, the purple and the purple, the purple of the spiral, that is a very early stage of development, the purple of the chakras, that is a very late stage of development. But what if those are just individualized expressions that we know about? What if the collective expression is also doing that dance? And what if we are in a dimensional shift now? The planet is on a dimensional shift between realms. What if we're shifting out of the third dimension, integrating a fourth dimension awareness and moving into a fifth dimension awareness, and potentially even a sixth dimension and beyond? Whether we're using colors or words or numbers, somehow they're all dancing. And so I want to know about what magic lives within you and how is it guiding you in this lifetime. And so as we're talking, as we're sharing today, I'd love for you to just have a piece of paper in front of you where if someone says something that you really, oh my God, that word, that phrase is speaking to me, jot it down. Jot it down. And then what I want to do, especially today, is talk about something I'm fascinated with because of my research over the last 5 or 6 years. It started with me taking the stages inventory, and this is like 2011. So this is quite a while ago, maybe 2012, a long time ago. It was way before love stages. And I had 3 different people that spoke to me, asked me a question. Do you know Terry O'Fallon? I didn't. I'd never met her. But 3 people mentioned her name. And that tapped my curiosity. And that was the beginning of my understanding. And the difficulty with, and I'll say this right now, there is a limitation to the stages inventory. The scoring is dependent upon words, and words are coming from the human mind. the intellect in many moments, and it's a limitation. And so, but that was the beginning for me. It was an entry point. And one of the phrases that also came to me from Terry was the knowing of repeating patterns. And all of a sudden, I began to see the repeating patterns in my own life, the patterns of magic, especially in this last month, getting ready for this call. The magic from my early childhood. Oh my God. I think back and the magic of sitting under the dining room table when I was a tiny child and playing house under the dining room table and looking through the lace tablecloth hanging down over the table and looking at a plaque up on the wall on which were the words. I doubt that I could even read them, but I recognized the plaque much later in my life as I learned how to read. And it was about this kind of energy, and we know all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to that purpose. So, repeating patterns of magic. Fabienne, are you at a point where you can talk about that in your life and talk about your choice for the page this morning? Just say yes or no. I'll go on if you're not ready.
Yeah, a little later, I think.
Okay. So one of the things that I see in my life is the repeating pattern that I wrote about in this document that I sent to you. There's been a repeating pattern of my doing interviews, and I'm not going to talk about that in detail now because I think it's interrelated to some other repeating patterns. I think one of the repeating patterns that is interrelated to is to one of the people that's on this call that I've known for many, many years, going on 50 years now, and that's Ed. And so I asked Ed if he would be willing to come on to the call and talk about the repeating patterns that he and I have actually experienced together over a period of almost 50 years. So Ed, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Can everyone hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as Marge knows, we met in around 1972 here in Kansas City. And the interesting thing is we were at a singles dance at Arrowhead Stadium, which is the football stadium, indoor. And I looked down and I saw this gal talking to a bunch of guys, and she was so radiant that I said, oh my, I got to meet that gal. And so I walked up to her and said, you know, would you mind dancing? And she says, well, I am talking to these other folks right now and perhaps later. So they split up. She went out, sat by herself, and I walked over and asked her to dance, and we danced, and the rest is kind of history. And we've known one another ever since then. And that was June the 6th, as I believe, because that was your son's birthday at the time. And he was away in Boulder, Colorado, visiting with your parents. So anyway, we got together and we made a date. We went out later that week, I think, and went horseback riding. And then once again, that's history. And then then we started seeing one another. And I was in Kansas City from St. Louis, running a branch office in a mortgage banking company, and they closed the office. So Marge asked me, she says, well, what is it you want to do? And I says, well, I think I'd like to go back to school. She says, well, why don't you? She says, I've got this lower level here. You can move your stuff in there. You go back to college. And I did. And I completed that after a couple of years. And we were still seeing one another and that sort of thing. And then she moved to New York with the Feminist Press. And I said, that's fine. Things will work out. And so our lives went on. And then she went on to UMass and did other things. And then she ended up moving back to Kansas City. And we got back together again and start seeing one another and that sort of thing. And we became lifetime friends. Then she moved to, as I mentioned, back to Kansas City, and then eventually to Tustin. And I visited her at Tustin at her place during the, well, I know it was inauguration time for Trump, because we both sat there kind of slumped over and said, what's going on in this country? So, but anyway, the result is that we continued seeing one another. She's been in Kansas City many times to go to the Unity Village, where they had conventions and meetings, etc. And so we would see one another then. And so we've just kind of stayed in touch and been friends, and we're very, very close and very, very admiring of one another, I would say that. And we both know that we were influential in one another's lives and for the future, and what we've both have been able to accomplish, and where we are today in our lives. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell about the last 50 years or so.
Do you remember what I wrote about you in my book? The phrase that I used, I quoted you.
Not right offhand. I don't.
I quoted you. These were your words. We were important cogs in each other's wheel of life.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. More so than anyone else. Yes. More so than my parents. Although my grandmother was a big cog in my life. So my Grandma Holtman. Yeah. So, but absolutely. Absolutely. And we both know that. We both recognize it. So.
So this is an example. And if you have a piece of paper in front of you, I want you to jot down what I'm calling the 4 acts of your life. And I just made these up. They're completely, I've never seen anybody else talk about them. So I'm just making it up. So you can change them around to suit your own preferences if you want to. You can make up your own acts of your life. But if I've always playfully said, let's go for 100 years, and then we can see if we want to have more, how we feel about it. So I took the idea of going for 100 years and simply broke it into 4 acts of your life. So these would be the 4 acts if we did that. And the first act would be from 0 to 25. So this includes your early childhood, it includes your teenage years, it includes the early 20s, the first half of the 20s, the time that some people, at least they used to, I think it's less that pattern now, time when people would think about getting married, and maybe a first marriage would occur, or a marriage that lasted for an entire lifetime, but 0 to 25. And I say that first marriage piece, realizing that was when my first marriage occurred. And then the second act of your life would be age 25 to 50. Now, why is 25 in both of those realms? Because age 25 it happens sometime during a year, and it could be during the early months of the year or the later months of the year, or right on the dividing point, which, like June is a dividing June, July would be a dividing point. So I just include 25 as the end and the beginning of the second act. So 25 to 50. During that stage, Ed and I met in my life. Ed and I met in my life in the second act of my life. So 25 to 50. And I think that was the second act of your life too, Ed.
Yeah.
So did it mean that we didn't have an act before that? Of course not. We had clearly other acts before that. But this one happened to be one that held a lifelong significance, it seems. And the second act then is from 25 to 50. So during that time, I was doing some of the things Ed mentioned in sharing his, and I wanted him to tell his view, because sometimes our views will differ. And one person will have one perception and another person will have another perception. Interestingly, Ed and I, most of the time, have a similar perception. And even around some significant kinds of things, like we were both McGovern delegates to a Democratic state convention before we met each other. Right. And didn't know each other then. I went with someone else that was another significant person in my life, Robert Hudson. So fascinating. So, but during that era of 25 to 50, a lot of really important things happened in my life. Those were the years where I went to New York to do a year-long experience with the feminist press. It started as a volunteer kind of thing. With a conversation, I called Florence Howe, the director of the press, and asked her when I could get some curriculum. And I felt like I was a perpetrator of harm to young women who had been left out of history books. And I only learned about that because I was required to take a class on a curriculum for my teaching credential. This is when Ed knew me. And as a result of that, my whole life began to shift. My life shifting was going to shift Ed's life. And we didn't understand these things with our human mind. The universe somehow was moving us through the evolutionary process of individualized souls. So in those years, I went to New York first, and then I went to Amherst, Massachusetts. I worked on my doctoral degree. It was in those years that I also experienced my own call to ministry. And this was the second group of 100 interviews that I did with ministers. And this document that I sent all of you talks about this. And so really, really important things that relate to our individualized in this lifetime destiny path, which may be about a collective destiny path. So it's really an interesting question. 25 to 50. And then the third act of your life, if you split it up into these 25 years, and keep in mind, I said I made these up, and so you can make up your own. The third act of your life, I identified as 50 to 75. Why? This is after I did the interviews with ministers. This is when I was 50 years old. I was in Walnut Creek, California, my first church, senior minister of Unity of Walnut Creek. I was beginning to experience dimensions I'd never heard of before. I began, a meditation teacher dropped into my life, Jack Cornfield. insight meditation. They never taught that at Unity's ministerial school. I didn't know about insight meditation or Vipassana, which ended up being my primary meditation practice that's focused on the breath. So all kinds of interesting dynamics. And you can look at these years of your life and you can begin to recognize, oh my God, that's one of the pieces. I call them the 1,000 pieces of a puzzle. And then the third act, if you use 25-year cycles, would begin age 50 to 75. Now, it was during this time that I came to Unity of Tustin. Interestingly, what I now recognize is that there was an interesting dissolving dynamic, an interesting dissolving energy at the end of my first act. It happened to have occurred in the divorce from my first husband, my first marriage ending. And an interesting dissolving act at the end of my second act. The first dissolving act I initiated. I really was the one that initiated that first divorce. The second dissolving act, I didn't. It was the divorce from my second husband. And his name was John. He was a ministerial student in Unity. What I can see now is that if it had not been for John in my life, who was introduced to me by Robert Hudson that I just mentioned, the universe has a way of connecting us with the people that are part of our soul's destiny. And each connection, each point of connection is like an intersection in time. It's going to be something that Fabienne might mention when she talks about the flower of life. And in that ending of my second marriage, it took me into a dark night of the soul, and it took me into a whole reevaluation of my life. I walked away from my plans after having completed a doctoral degree with intentions and goals related to that. And I walked away from them and said yes to what I then identified as being called by God. That happened in my second act. But in the third act, another kind of interesting dynamic happened. The water was rough again, and the marriage to my husband, Paul, was entering some waters that were rough. And we were in Walnut Creek where we had gotten married. He was a minister. I was ahead of him in school. So he came later, the year after. And we were not a match as co-ministers. It was really, really clear. We had two different mindsets, two different worldviews about what it looked like. And it was rough waters. And so at the end of that period, we went back to Colorado, and I was in Colorado when I got the call from Unity Village saying, there is a church in trouble. It's in Southern California, it's in Tustin, and we need to get someone in there fast. The minister walked out on a Sunday morning and, we need to get someone in there fast. And would you be available to go as a temporary minister? And I said, yes. Unexpected. I didn't apply for it. It came as totally a surprise. I wasn't looking for it. It was a surprise. And at age 53, I came to Unity of Tustin. And that was the beginning of the era for the 19 years that I was there, that eventually I called the Campus of Consciousness. And that was the beginning of people like Eckhart Tolle and Adyashanti and Andrew Harvey and Ram Dass coming to Unity of Tustin. This is in the third act, the early stages of the third act. Fascinating. I went through another two real important dissolve things in that third act. One was the death of my son. And that was when I was approaching 65. I think maybe I was 65. And then at about age 70, 71, I can't remember exactly, in 2011, I went through the death of my beloved childhood friend, the first love of my life. His name was Ron. So the dissolve is there. So the dissolve and the undoing of all of the kinds of things that emerged in these different acts of our lives are part of what it's the chaotic universe. Part of the chaos and the undoing opens the way for the next periods of time that we will be living. And so the fourth act of your life is at 75, if you use this thing that I made up of 25 years, 75 to 100. And so I entered that fourth act of my life, interestingly, 7 years ago. So I've done the first 7-year cycle of that fourth act. And it goes into the beyond, whatever that means for you. If you did use the 25 years, it would be age 100. If you choose your own model, you may get another. But something really important seems to be happening. And this involves not only individualized shifts, this seems to involve a cosmic shift. I've had this playful dance with astrology in the last year, and it is in this period of time that we are entering a new 200-year cycle that has to do with the shift from structures that relate to foundations that related to this planet Saturn, Capricorn, or into structures that have to do with transformation, higher vibrations that relate to planets such as Uranus or Aquarius. The Aquarian age, it was called some years ago. Anyway, it seems to be a huge planetary shift that we're going through right now, where old structures are in process of dissolving, and new structures are in processes of emerging. And my guess is that some of the people on this call may, in fact, be part of that structure that is emerging. Not as a personal self, but as an impersonal self. It's about the small s self emerging into the capital S self. It's about the soul ascending and spirit descending and coming into a divine moment that is absolutely perfect, where you speak the language of a destiny path that you are uniquely called to. And that it's like all of the octaves on the piano, all of the keys on the piano. There's not just one octave. You don't just play a later stage. There's many octaves on the piano. There's a lot of different, there's C, songs written in the key of C, songs written in the key of G or C key of F or a minor key. And there are songs that interrelate the two. And so sometimes it's like an orchestra playing, sometimes it's like an amazing jazz combo. But it's not individual now. It is about you being part of a collective. So that's what I'm wanting to hear more about. And so I would love to go back to the gallery view, which I've just done on my own computer. I was in speaker view. And if you go to the gallery view, you can see the people. Everyone's muted except Ed and I, who were talking last time. And I would love for Fabienne to come on now. And Fabienne, are you willing to talk now about the flower of life?
I will admit that it will still be very spontaneous because first of all, hello again, everyone. I said hello before we started the recording, but so nice to see everyone. And in the meantime, nice to see you, Carol, as well. See you turned on your video, and so good to be with everyone. What started was simply this morning I said to Marj, well, I'm going to bring in the backhand the picture that we use in the reminder email so that people can see what it was about. So of course now a few things happen in the meantime, and what I had ready is not ready anymore, because that's another pattern. I suggest one thing and then it becomes this big thing, and then it's like, okay, so I'll just trust the process. But so Mark said, well, could you talk about the pattern, the repeating pattern of the flower of life in your life? So this was not planned, and I don't have all of the information, because one thing that is a repeating pattern for me is there are so many interconnecting things, and I am going to bring that pictures that I wanted to originally bring, because that is just a very clear explanation of what happens even for me. So let me see if you can see that. Can you see the picture there?
Yes.
Great. So this, the pattern in the center is what we're talking about with the flower of life. But you might or might not have realized that in the reminder email, this was the picture in the background on top of the magic thing that is now in the back for me. So when Marj asked me just a few minutes before the call, like the repeating patterns of the flower of life, I do know when it started. I do know when I saw that pattern for the very first time. And that was in Belgium. So I was in the kitchen. I think it both kind of happened at the same time. I saw it at my friend Genevieve's home and at my sister Brigitte's home. And they had this pattern of the flower of life underneath their water. And I was really puzzled and curious. So they said, yeah, that energized water. And I was like, interesting. So that was the first seed for me in that field of the flower of life. Then maybe it was the same year or just like a little later, I went to Ireland for a retreat. And there, the retreat center, I learned, was completely built on sacred geometry. And I got fascinated with sacred geometry. then I didn't connect the two yet because I don't think they had the flower of life yet there, but it was still geometrical patterns. And somehow I lost what happened in between. But in 2014, I know at the end of it was 2015, sorry, but it was the end of my 44, sorry, I'm getting confused again. I didn't prepare for this. Anyway, Marge and I were at the retreat, another retreat with Andrew Harvey for celebrating the sacred marriage within. And it was just before my birthday. And my parents had told me, if you find something that you like to buy from us as a gift, please go ahead and do it. Buy it from us and then let us know. So I bought this little pyramid here that at the bottom has the flower of life. Don't know if you can see it. So it's like, it's at the bottom, but it's also reflecting throughout. And there was many connecting and repeating patterns even there because Andrew Harvey, I had met him first, in New York. And so for me, that's where it's complex. And that's where it goes to that story with the overlapping circles, is that one thread of overlapping patterns is interacting with so many others. So it's getting a little confused, especially without taking a little bit of time to connect the dots to put it together. Then I believe that was in 2016 with it, the year where we split the year and we went through all the codes of the co-creation in the garden and taking responsibility for one site. And so I was clear I wanted to do site 6, which was the union of, again, the feminine and the masculine, which was very connected to the retreat with Andrew Harvey. But I really wanted to do about sacred geometry. And then David, I don't know if you remember, you were there, we did the dream work, but there was also already the pattern of the butterfly. So all those were already connecting as well. And then we did the whole intensive about I called it the love and wisdom fractal. So it was the fractals, the sacred geometry, the repeating patterns in that way, as well as the repeating patterns, even at one moment in time, with the holographic parts of the small and is reflected in the big and vice versa. And of course, the butterflies continued, and I was just trying to see, again, last minute, but if I could find the pictures from Unity Village where we first saw that big flower of life that Marge then decided to buy. I do have the picture. I just don't know how to speak and show it at the same time. Again, I wasn't prepared for this. So, so when we were at Unity Village, we were in the bookstore, and I think I might have noticed this first, and I showed it to Marge. I'm not 100% sure. And then she said, oh, we should get it. And then she on the spot decided to buy it and bring it home. But as I was looking for the picture, there was also, like, again, just for me, that's where it's getting a little complex for me, and that I would still love to find a way to follow the threads and being able to not isolate the threads because they are interconnected, but do it in a way that is exactly not like now, which I feel is very confusing. But I have this intention of doing it in a more relatable way and with pictures and videos. But again, I didn't know this was going to happen today. So I can, now that I finished talking, I can see if I can share some of those things, but I couldn't do both at the same time without the preparation. So let me see.
So while you're looking, let me simply say that when surprises happen, it does feel confusing because it surprises you. If it was something that you understood, it wouldn't be a surprise. So when the surprises happen, it's going to confuse you. you're going to feel potentially a little off balance. You're going to feel maybe unprepared. You're going to be able, perhaps feel, I don't know if I want this. And it's happening anyway. I mean, it's like my second divorce. I didn't want it. I had this fantasy that marriages lasted for a lifetime. And I was the one that wanted to end the first marriage, but I didn't want that second marriage to end. And it did anyway. So surprises happen and they'll be confusing. You won't understand them. So thank you for showing us that picture, Fabienne. And
Can you see this too?
yes, there it is. There it is hanging at Unity Village Bookstore.
What I found is interesting is I don't think I ever noticed before now, but just in the background, I'll play it again, you can see there are the titles, teens, youth transition, like there is even some of the repeating patterns listed in the backhand on the bookshelf there. So that was a little
fascinating. Really interesting. So I'm curious, Michaelia, I'd love to have you come in and just share where you are right now, because I know you've looked at some of these things. Why don't you unmute yourself?
So, I wonder, do you hear a lot of noises? Because I'm on a balcony, and there's a bunch of children screaming. Can you hear that? I think I will go inside. I think that's probably just, hold on a second, because they are just having so much fun.
Well, while Michaelia goes inside, let me tell you, Michaelia has been with Called by Love from the very beginning.
Yes.
And Michaelia was, I don't know if you call yourself retired or whether you still are doing some practice, a medical doctor in Vienna, Austria. And she came to the Called by Love retreat at Big Bear. I mean, our journey has had a lot of repeating. So go ahead, Michaelia.
Well, you know, I mean, a lot of things happened over the past 7 or 8 months. It started probably in November when my mother died. And you know, I mean, sorry?
There's the dissolve.
Yeah, absolutely. It was absolutely a time of dissolve. Absolutely. You know, I mean, it was a dissolve that was very peaceful, actually. I mean, you know, I mean, it was intense, but I have had many dissolves in my life. You know, and while I listened now to Fabienne talking and to you talking, I thought, you know, I mean, it gets better and better each time because the first dissolves, you know, I mean, really, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of resistance and upheaval and turmoil. But, you know, I mean, the last dissolve really, so, you know, I mean, my mom died and I had lived, you know, I mean, with my mom to support mom, help my mom, support my mom in the house of my childhood for the past 7 years. It was exactly 7 years. And, you know, I mean, she was 94 and she really wanted to go, you know, I mean, it was not unexpected and it was not, it was a dramatic event, but it was acceptable. Anyway, so, you know, I mean, then it took me a few months to close out the past 7 years. We were together with my sisters and my brother, we were deciding to sell the house. So basically I cleaned out and moved. I moved to apartment back to so I live in Vienna now again in the city. It's really a perfect apartment. I mean, I just don't even know how this came about, but just materialized. And it's really a good place to be. Good area, close. It's close to the Danube. It's close to the, to the river. It's interesting because I've always lived close to rivers. And in the past few years, it was more the smaller rivers, but now it's really the big river. And yeah. So basically, I've been spending the past few months settling in. Again, it's been a bit exhausting because I've had many moves in my life. But looking back, it was really a smooth ride, and here I am, and it's like you mentioned it in the beginning. It was like anticipating things to come without having the slightest idea what this is going to be. So I know something is coming, and I know, and I often think of you because you mentioned glimpses, and I do get glimpses, and I recognize the glimpses.
Let's do a potential of people raising their hands. How many of you, and I put us back on gallery view, so how many of you, well, not everyone has their video on, but if you'll turn on your video just long enough to vote on this, to raise your hand, how many of you have what feels like
hand electronically too?
An intuitive awareness that something is coming, that there is an important piece of your life that you're going, and by the way, we're right at an entry point of a new 20-year cycle that will be starting actually at the end of this year in December. We'll be going through a final square that is about this chaotic energy, and then we move into an amazing energy of expansion and thriving and even financial well-being and love. And it doesn't mean there won't be some speed bumps, because there's always speed bumps, but we're right on the beginning entry point of a 20-year cycle. How many of you have an inner kind of knowing that something's coming into your life and you don't have a clue exactly what it is? Sometimes you get glimpses, but you know something's coming, but you don't know what it is. Raise your hand if that's true for you. So I see Fabienne's hand up, I see David's hand up, I see my hand up, I see Anna's hand up, I see Kiara's hand up, I see Gaynell's hand up, I see Coral's hand up, and Michaelia's hand up, and Patty's hand up. Or is that because you're ready to speak, Patty? That may be your... It's, Ed Rabel, who was one of my teachers in seminary, ministerial school, they called it, used to say, Jesus came back from the future. Well, what I want to tell each of you is that your future self is already here. It already knows what your destiny path is. It already knows the exact moment that your soul agreed to come in, and that was your birth date, the exact moment that your soul agreed to leave, or indicated that I'm talking about David Hawkins now, said in very, very rare circumstances that can be renegotiated, but 99% of the time it's not. Your soul knows when you're leaving. And so your soul already knows what's going to be coming to you. Your human mind doesn't, because it's beyond the human mind. But your soul knows. And it will give you those glimpses. It will bring the people into your life, like Robert Hudson came into my life. and introduced me to a person I married who ended up leaving my life, but brought me into Unity Ministry. That's the way it works. Those people are the connectors, the connecting points of light in the flower of life. Ed and I share some of those connecting points of light, really, really in clear ways. So it's fascinating. Your future is already known to your soul. It's just your human mind that doesn't know what it is yet. And when it shows itself to you, part of your human self goes into resistance or confusion or disorientation, or maybe you think you're going crazy, or maybe you think something's wrong because things are shifting. And it's really fascinating how we do that. And so, Patty, is your hand still up of wanting to share? You had your hand up.
Share. I had my hand up just to be in agreement, but I'd be happy to share. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I have on an earpiece, that's why I'm asking.
Well, all I can see is your picture. So if you want to turn on the video, we can see you.
No, actually, I'm leaving up the picture because I'm in the process of moving and my house is a mess and I'm a mess. So
Okay.
just leave up that nice picture.
That's great. Go ahead and share, Patty.
Okay. I'd say my first act for the 0 to 25 was more of me finding my first love, going to university, and then starting my career. I was not interested at that time at all in marriage and family and children. I was really interested in getting my degree and starting my career. In the second act, I began dating, still career building. I left California and went to Atlanta, Georgia for work, and then came back and then moved to Seattle, Washington, which was really interesting because they're very different places. And I traveled, I think I visited 13 countries, and I was really enjoying my independence. And for me, it was thinking, am I ever going to get married? Do I ever want to get married? That just wasn't in my radar at that time. But in my third act, a friend of mine introduced me to meditation. And after that, I found Unity. And I learned a lot at Unity and started growing spiritually. And I met my first husband. What was interesting is that my father transitioned the month before I was married. And then when you talk about surprises, the next year, my husband transitioned unexpectedly. And then 3 years after that, my mother transitioned. So I had several surprises in loss. And it was very telling, very telling. I'm sorry.
Can you see those moments of loss as part of the energy of undoing that opens the field to your next stage of life?
Absolutely. I found that to be very true, particularly when my mother passed, because I did have to go to her home and begin to clean out. And I found a lot of family history that I was totally unaware of. And it was very eye-opening and very revealing and very comforting and very disturbing all at the same time. So I think that finding Unity and beginning the meditation, all those things prepared me for the loss that I experienced, but also my next step in life. And now I have remarried, and I'm waiting for that new adventure because I'm moving to a different country. So,
So Patty, did you expect to remarry, or was that a surprise also?
that was a huge surprise. I was not expecting to remarry at all. But he is a wonderful person. I was introduced to him by friends, and it was very much unexpected, but ended up being a very pleasant surprise. So now I am moving to a new country and starting a new adventure, and I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen next.
So what's the new country?
Canada. I'm moving to Canada.
I didn't hear that.
I'm
Canada.
moving to Canada.
All right, fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing, Patty. I hope all of you are hearing that this is the way it works. It's not something you plan. It's the way the universe works. So it's part of the evolution of consciousness. Is it mandatory? No. You can stop yourself at any moment by not being interested, by not listening, by not saying yes. The best example of that in my life is my brother. He is exactly where he was, living in Boulder, Colorado, where we grew up as kids, still in the mindset where he was when he was working there and owned a service station there. He has not opened to anything beyond that. So you can stop. This is not, it's like A Course in Miracles. This is a required curriculum. The only choice you have is when you take it. It's so, one of the radical things it says in A Course in Miracles is that forgiveness, one act of forgiveness, can save you 1,000 lifetimes. Interesting. Anyone else like to share? We have about 15 minutes left. I'd love to hear from some. Gaynell, I haven't heard from you for a long time. Why don't you come online and unmute?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, it is so good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And I certainly agree with this subject today about not so many unexpected things. And it's just been fabulous. At the moment, a lot of the time, it seems like a disaster, like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. But then we don't know where that takes us. And down the road is we learn, and fortunately, one of the worst things that have ever happened to me in life, it's definitely the worst, my husband passing away. But the beautiful thing about it, it led me to Unity of Tustin. And from there, so much, and then getting into Ashaya Ascension, and that has just turned my life around. It's been wonderful. So things that even the worst in the world that you think is happening. And I do believe my husband has, from the other side, has helped guide me along the way to these other adventures, because he was very, very spiritual himself and taught me so much from the time we got married until his death. But he wanted me to continue, I'm sure, on this spiritual path. And I see so many sacred things happening. Even him and I meeting and I lived in Dallas and he lived in California, and we met in Manhattan. And what was the chance of that? And it was like it was meant to be. And I knew it ahead of time. This is what I had to do in order to get to where I didn't know why. I didn't know why I had to do certain things until it showed up. But it's been beautiful. And meeting Marj and the people at Unity of Tustin has been such a blessing in my life, and introducing me to so many wonderful speakers there that I have grown with. And I'm still growing and learning, and I'm loving it. And thank you, Marj, so much for continuing to have this call by love. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, Gaynell, one of the things about Called by Love is that it has been a source of love for me. I am really experiencing what, and in the document that I sent, I described this a little bit. I'm experiencing a big shift in my own life right now. And the shift actually has to do with the shift away from teaching. And let me just share with you one of the ways it describes itself. There is a knowing of ordinary and extra people, or knowing still of ordinary and extraordinary people. But it's like they're living all of their lives in the dazzling brilliance of all of the colors of the rainbow. And they're sharing, like we're doing today, it's like the sharing of parables. It's not stories about success or high achievement, or it's not stories about right and wrong, or you have to believe this or you have to believe that. It's about how life dances. And they're parables that can be heard and understood if one is hearing and seeing through the eyes of love, wherever you are in your experience of life. Everyone being able to say it their own way, in their own time, in their own words, in their own expression. And yet all of us are dancing together, all of us in all of the acts of our lives and all of the stages of our lives. We're all part of the beauty, and it includes us individually and it includes us collectively. It has receptive energy in it. It has active energy in it. It's about co-creating. It's not about me creating something. It's about our co-creating and collaborating and dancing and playing. I love playing. I don't know if you remember, Gaynell, when people would come to Unity of Tustin, and I often would say, we just play church. It's almost like playing house, you know. When you get married in your early 20s or even late teens, as I did, that first marriage was like playing house, trying to figure out what it was you were supposed to play when you got married, you know. And church was just playing church. What we were doing was co-creating together. And some of us played in different octaves. You know, we didn't play all of the low keys on the piano. We played all over the piano, or all the low strings on the harp. We played all of the key strings on the harp. We would play arpeggios and we would play glissandos. We would play major keys or we would play minor keys. Minor keys were harder on the harp because it required knowing how to pedal with your feet. But we could improvise like jazz players where there was just a genius involved. And yet each of us has our own destiny path. Michaelia, I'm really curious if you're still doing your work with the big book that you told me about and that I ordered and bought. And you took the deep dives into it in ways I never did.
You mean
And
the gene keys?
say that again?
The gene keys?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yes, on the site. You know, I mean, it's like it's a part of something bigger. You know, but yeah, I'm using the teachings in terms of a framework. Yeah, it's quite useful.
Yeah. So we all have destiny paths. Our destiny paths shift and change. So I'm just going to use Ed as an example because I know a lot about his life. So in his first act, he went into the Navy. Or maybe Ed, maybe you should come on live and I can use you as an example and let you join in if you want to. And Michaelia, you can stay if you want to also, because you may want to have some comments about. Unmute, Ed, if you can. You're mute.
Okay, yeah.
How old were you when you went into the Navy?
I was 18 years old.
So you were in your first active life.
Right.
And it came out of pain in a way because you were wanting to get away.
Yeah. Well, there were,
And that choice.
well, I mean, there were three what I term as interventions. One is going in the Navy, which got me away from my family and my dad, who was very oppressive. And I was flunking out of college. And the second one was moving to Kansas City, because that got me away from St. Louis and all the BS and the Catholicism there and the way you were raised. And the third one was meeting you. And as you well know, there was a certain amount of freedom there. You're the one that encouraged me to go back to school, college, which I did. And it was just very liberating. And so those are the three really important shifts in my life. And I can identify with. I mean, I realize them. I mean, they changed my life. They changed my focus. They changed everything about me. I mean, it was miraculous in a sense. But yeah, and we've spoken about this many times.
Yeah,
So.
and you have also said no to me sometimes.
Well, that's all part of life.
Of course it is. But so it's not a requirement that you follow this kind of energy that opens. And when I went to the East Coast, Ed said, I'm just a Kansas City kind of guy, or Midwest kind.
Midwest, right, exactly. And I did not want to go to the East Coast.
Yeah, you can say no, and it will, I mean, you have the right, you know, the only choice you have is when you take it, this energy. So Michaelia, are people called to certain careers or professions, do you think?
If people are called to certain careers, yeah, definitely.
So Ed went into mortgage banking. He actually became a broker, and he went into became a banker that helped people get home loans. He developed a whole clientele of assisting and helping people. What was his destiny path? Can you give us insight from the gene codes?
I mean, I could. I could if
just some guesses.
If you gave me your birthday, you know, I mean, the gene keys, you know, I mean, they are quite useful in terms of delineating the pattern. I mean, the pattern you spoke about. It's not about necessarily, I mean, what is my career? What is my job? But what is my bigger purpose? What is my soul's purpose? What is my soul destiny? And, I mean, your job and your life path and your career may be expression of that. And, I mean, you may have someone with exactly the same birthday and date and time taking a very different route. But, I mean, still, you would be able to identify a similar pattern. So that's
maybe Metalia, at some future time, we'll have you come on and tell us more about that.
Also, though, Marj, you introduced me to Unity. Remember when I was working at Boys Town and I came down and I visit you and you said, let's go up to the Unity Church on Sunday. Mind if I tag along? You said, fine. And I raised my children, my two kids, and my wife became a Unity people. In fact, she started this Montessori school at Unity on the plaza. So yeah, it was one thing led to another.
Yeah, and she's no longer your wife. So, that
That's
disappointment impacted your life. She said no to you at one point in time.
Yeah, well, we still get along great. I mean, we got two great kids.
I know. So this is the beautiful thing about the way we look at life. If we look at it as a divine dance that has choices, you can ask someone to dance and they can say, not right now. As Ed did one point in time. But what I see is, Ed, is in your choice going into the mortgage business, becoming a broker, ultimately working in banking, ultimately teaching people about how to get home loans, developing a whole client. All of this is reflective of how you help people. Even going to Boys Town is reflective of that. As you went to be a parent at Boys Town, I don't remember what you called it. A house
family teacher. Family
teacher. And it's all about, and you're a Libra in your chart, so there's a partnering energy. This is and in my chart, my astrology says that Ed is an air sign, and I don't have air in my chart. Guess what Ed gives me? Partnering energy and air. The ability to breathe and the higher realms, potentially. So people influence us in amazing ways in our lives, and our lives overlap and intersect. So Fabienne's in my life has done that in such an incredible way. Kansas City is an overlapping energy.
Sure.
In my chart, I have a Star of David if I move to Kansas City. It was there when I lived there, and if I go back, because it's in my natal chart, my Star of David is in Kansas City. I look at David Jonathan and I think, well, he's one of my Davids. And we did dream work together. So it's fascinating. And we are just 1 minute away from being out of time. I have so loved this. What I want to invite all of you to do is to, if you're interested, print out the document that came to you in the reminder email that was entitled, "It Was a Time When," and go into about 15 or 20 minutes of silence and just start with that prompt. Before you start, ask the Holy Spirit to guide you and to write in you and through you and as you. Ask the Holy Spirit to show you, and just use the prompt, "It was a time when," and then listen to what comes. Write as fast as you can. Don't edit it. Don't try to critique it. Don't try to think it with your human mind. Just let it flow. Now, the document that I wrote on the front and back of one page during a writing assignment. And then yesterday, or the day before, I went back and I transcribed it into a Word document and added some other things that I had from a journal where when Fabienne and I sit in the silence and write, I get more information. So I invite you to do that and come back on next month, and maybe you'll have other surprises to share. We are in a time of amazing creative energy. Venus, which is the planet of love, and it's love at a very high vibration because it's being impacted by Uranus. It's transforming love. And Mars are doing a dance, and now they're we have the impact of Leo, and I find astrology somewhat enlightening. Not everyone does. Ed says, I'm not really interested in that. So it's not a requirement. So just understand that you decide what your life means. The only choice you have is when you do it, the dance. And that doesn't mean A Course in Miracles. That means the curriculum called destiny. It means the curriculum called oneness. It means the curriculum that I call love. And we're at the end of our call this time. I just love you all so much. It's been just wonderful being with you today. Absolutely beautiful. Anna, I'm so glad to see you. Love to hear from you if you come on another call. Coral, I'm so glad to see you. Just David, I'm so glad to see you. It's just exquisite. What I know is you are all part of my heart. The reason I continue to do Called by Love is because of you. Because you are so important to my soul. And so as we go into our closing today, we simply say, oh, thank you, God, beloved one. And let's listen together to Liebestrom, Dream of Love.
Have a great day, everyone. Much
Have a
love.
wonderful, wonderful day, wonderful month. Know that the universe is co-creating through you and calling you to love.
Good to see everyone.